Okay, thanks a lot. I feel very happy and fortunate that it's the Lectures for Future that were chosen or that were set in the right spot for this occupation to start. Yeah, maybe just a quick information for those of you who don't know the Lectures for Future. It's an interdisciplinary lecture series in several universities in Austria that was inspired basically by a climate protest movement, as you can tell by the name, by the Fridays for Future, but that has tried to solidarize in academics with these important movements, and has tried to foster the academic discourse on the climate crisis and other sustainability related issues, but also to go beyond the universities and kind of with these public events try and incorporate and invite and integrate people from everywhere, interested people from everywhere. And that's why I'm super glad how this all fits together, and also happy that we found Ulrich Brand as a speaker today, who has been involved with the Ulrich Brand movement quite a bit in the past few weeks. Yeah, my name is Max Muhr, and I am hosting the Lectures for Future at Angewandte with my colleague Carlos Toledo, who is sitting here. We also have, after Uli's lecture, 2 more comments on the concept of imperial mode of living that are more practice inspired. And yeah, also thank you for the occupation that we can follow through with this program. And I think at latest, when we start discussing the content of what we hear in the talks, is when we inevitably have to talk about this occupation and what it stands for. So yeah, with that, maybe just a quick introduction for those that don't know Ulrich Brand. He's a professor of international politics at the University of Vienna, head of Department of Political Sciences, I think, head of the Latin American Research Network, and yeah, I think best known for his concept of imperial mode of living, which Uli, I think you will dive into. And thanks for coming again, and the word is yours.
Good evening also from my side. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to be here at this moment. Congratulations for this occupation. I had the chance, and I was really honored that some weeks ago, when the occupation started at the University of Vienna in C1, I was invited to the first evening panel. Probably some of you have been there. 600 people in a completely full C1 auditorium, and with a very, very intense atmosphere. It was not nice because the cause of the occupation is not nice. Yeah, the cause is a very, very important political crisis, or the multiple crises, if you like, if we have, and to respond in this way, I think is very important, to interrupt a bit our everyday life, to create these spaces, to think together, to think in initiatives, to encourage ourselves to get outside of our usual everyday paths. I think this is very, very valuable, and all the best for you, all the best for the movement. There will be ups and downs, of course. Yeah, there will be also, if you like, closings of occupations, but I hope that the spirit is there, and the learning process, the initiatives, and yeah, all the best from my side. And now here I have to reconcentrate a bit. Many thanks, Carlos, Max, Ruth, Hansel, also for the comments, and Maxi as well. Thank you. Sorry. I'm very keen, and I feel a bit uncomfortable to talk in Vienna again about the imperial mode of living as a concept, but I will give a short introduction, and I think it's also very important to talk about to get the different perspectives on it, political education and arts, and what we can do with this. Hansel had just in Otterkring a very nice exhibition where he also referred to the concept. I also, because I forget it always at the end, I already announced it, I brought some books. You can have a look, and also, if you like, buy it. And also Josef Mühlbauer is here. He edited a book on the imperial mode of living. It's more a very concrete, very rich empirical research using the concept. Josef is also here, and I think the book is also there on the table. So when Markus Wissen and I started to think, we cannot even detect and go back when we used for the first time the concept imperial mode of living, but the problem was clear. The problem which really struck us and made us a bit nervous analytically and also politically was that some of you might remember in 2008, 2009, in the financial and economic crisis, the most important crisis strategy, despite all the knowledge about climate change, despite all the conference, the Copenhagen conference of the Climate Framework Convention failed in 2009, yeah, because it was such a lot of tension among the global players how to deal with climate change. Despite all this high politicization of the ecological crisis, the major policy, the most successful policy was the so-called scrapping bonuses, was that the state in Austria 2,000 euro, in Germany 2,500 euro, gave to the car holders, even the car still functioned, money to buy a new car, to stabilize the automotive industry. This we couldn't believe. Yeah, that this, despite all this politicization, it is so clear that we have to overcome the centrality of the automobile, that despite this, the state, of course, pushed by the automotive industry, pushed by the trade unions, took this decision. And in Germany, it was 5 billion euro. Yeah, and this scrapping bonus was kind of the budget was emptied in 3 or 4 months. So it was so attractive. So for so many people to think, it's so great to get 2,500 euros to buy a new car and to get rid of my old one. So this is what I want to detect a bit in the first part. It's more an opener. In the second, my second thought this evening is I write with Markus a new book. We will present on Friday in Berlin the first chapters. That we are in a situation of 3 scenarios. And I will present them briefly, and I will argue that, and this is also a course for Ulrich Brand, the second scenario, the ecological modernization of capitalism, is also a major problem. And we have to that we have to overcome it. This is my second thought. In the third part, the longest part, if you like 15 minutes, I try to stick to 35, maybe 40 minutes, is then to introduce briefly the concept imperial mode of living, and then what we also propose in the book as alternatives, what we call a solidary mode of living. So please, those who already heard this at other occasions, get them as a repetition and wait for the 2 comments. I'm also very keen to listen to. So I need to accommodate a bit. Okay, cool. Yeah. Which one is it? Okay. Yeah. Okay, the first point I already made. The second is that we have still, in the global north, we know it from all the studies, it's everyday knowledge. It's not only the scientific knowledge, that the north has still an overproportional access and use of the global resources. The so-called footprint is far too large, mainly in the global north. The third point also was mentioned when the people wanted to get the scrapping bonus, they wanted to sell the car to get a new one, is the still unbroken attractiveness of the Western way of life, or what we call the imperial mode of living. And this is also, I come back to this later, in the case in many countries with so-called emerging economies. So here we can see that capitalism is not only destructive. Of course, our course here, the course of Ulrich Brand, the course of critical research, critical science, critical teaching, is to look at the large problems capitalism is causing. But still, for many people, not for everybody, but for many people, still capitalism is obviously something attractive, is something productive. And then we have a fourth aspect we didn't deal with in detail in the book, the first book on imperial mode of living, what we call the mechanisms of crisis externalization. That there are so manifold political, economic, ideological mechanisms that the crises should take place elsewhere. If we think in migration policies, yeah? So poor Africans, they have droughts, they have to leave their countries, but they won't enter Europe. Yes, so it's not possible. So the crisis should stay, and the results, the consequences of the crisis, the affected refugees, migrants, they should stay outside. So there is still, and maybe we should look much more in detail into these fine mechanisms of crisis externalization. And if we think today, I come back to this, how here the economy is greened, is ecologized, how renewable energy, how electric cars are now pushed in Austria, in Europe. Again, the resources come from elsewhere. Doesn't matter what are the conditions to get the resources. This is a bit the opening remark. Maybe you can. Is it okay? Or I can. Is it okay for you?
Yeah.
Okay. But it's not so comfortable for you. So, is it okay when I stand? Yeah. Okay. So then, no. So we can say name. We wanted a bit kind of an equal relationship, but I think it's more functional to talk like this. Okay, the second thought is that I already announced is the question of scenarios. A scenario technique is an abstraction, of course, yeah, but I think it helps us to think what are the projects, maybe realizable, maybe not, of dominant actors, but also involving weaker actors, subaltern actors. And we argue, it's much more an idea of the new book, that there are three scenarios we should consider. The first, think about Trump, think about Bolsonaro and others, is what we call an authoritarian stabilization of the imperial mode of living. Yeah, it's really climate denialists, it's America first, it's we don't care about the global south, there is a new economic war with China, etc., etc. I won't go into detail. We can discuss it, if you like, in the later on. The second project, and I would argue, and we argue in the new book, this has a potential to become hegemonic in the sense of Antonio Gramsci, to really be accepted and to be lived, what we call an ecological modernization of capitalism, or in the global south, green extractivism, yeah, to get the resources, the green resources for the energy transition, the mobility transition, etc., etc. And so the emblematic symbol for the authoritarian stabilization is, of course, to go along with the combustion engine for the cars. And the second is the electrification of the car fleet. So the projections, if you look at the strategies of the European Commission, of the governments, is not to overcome the automobile-centered mobility system. We know from so many studies this is a major problem, but the idea is to get the cars with an electric engine. This is the kind of the main idea. We could also go to food and agriculture or to others, but I stay with this example. And the third scenario, which is of course much weaker, but Erde Brand, if you like, is part of it, yeah, is how to create, how to think, how to open up spaces for a solidary mode of living. There's already much happening, much going on, but it's still, of course, rather at the edges. Yeah, pluriverse, feminist, democratic. Some even call it socialist. My third introductory thought is then, of course, the concept of the imperial mode of living, what we consider the root causes of the multiple crises. You don't have to read the quote. The main idea is that it's not only the powerful political strategies, the powerful economic strategies making globalization. Yeah? Going global, going to China, creating a new division of labor, getting the resources from Latin America, Africa, etc., etc. This is key. This is the push factor of liberal or neoliberal globalization since 5 centuries, 5 decades, 4 decades. There are many, different phases of globalization. But our point is that there is a persistence of patterns of production and consumption, and also consumption patterns of the everyday life that refer constantly to commodities, cell phones, notebooks, cheap meat, clothes, etc., cars, of course, etc., that are produced, the resources or the parts or the final products elsewhere under conditions of cheap labor and cheap nature, and this is highly destructive. So imperial does not mean imperialistic, does not mean the explicit politics to go elsewhere and to occupy land, but imperial is to make use, constant use of an elsewhere, of cheap labor and cheap nature elsewhere. And elsewhere we use consciously, of course it refers to the global south, these are my examples, but also the elsewhere is the Marchfeld, is the harvesting conditions, or is care conditions of many migrant workers doing care work here in Vienna. This is also a form of the imperial mode of production and living. And this has a persistence. This has, if you like, attraction, and is lived, needs to be lived, but it's also highly destructive, and it creates domination, it creates power. So our economy, not because people, consumers, have bad intentions, but we need to reproduce in our everyday lives in this. Of course, there is space of action. Yeah, you can live as a vegetarian, as a vegan, or you can think my human right to a cheap daily schnitzel, is still existent, and I want to get cheap meat every day. Of course, there is a range of action, but we argue that our structures, the structure of our societies, of the Austrian society, when it comes to the food system, to the mobility system, to the clothing system, is structured very much around this access to cheap commodities that are produced under certain conditions elsewhere, which means within Austria, with Eastern Europe, which means with the global south. And we argue against the dogma of the neoclassical thinking. If we have high enough growth rates, everybody will be better off at the end. You know this from ZIP when WIFO, the heads of the WIFO or IHS are giving their comments. The very neoclassical thinking, growth, and at the end, everybody is better off. We argue, no, this is not possible. It's not possible because capitalism needs this other side of the medal, the other side of the coin, the destructive side of the coin. And again, we argue consciously because when we presented the book and we got the invitations, and there were, for example, trade union members and leaders that said, what are you doing is to put the poor people onto a chair of culpability. And for you, all cats are gray. I don't know if this also exists, probably also in English, that everybody is equal. No, it's very important that this has to do with class structures, with gender structures, with racializing structures. It has to do with the strategies of capital, of firms, of states, if you think in free trade policies and others. It has to do with the very scientific system. I think also this is a reason why Ulrich Brand is so important. The dogma, I just come from, this was why I was a bit late. We had a working group on social ecological transformations within the Climate Change Center Austria. And at the edge of research, the main bulk of research is to get growth, to be competitive, to push for a development model which is not very sustainable. It's about discourses, growth, progress, a good living in the sense, not a good living as an alternative good living, but a good living to have more. Geiz ist geil, greed is cool, etc., etc. But, and this is our point, and this is why I think the book, we have now translations into 10 languages, which we are quite proud of it, that obviously in other countries also into Chinese. Yeah? Here's a doctoral student, a postdoc student from China for a year, working also on the imperial mode of living in China. Our point is that it has to do with everyday practices. And capitalism needs these everyday practices. It has to do with the habitus in the sense of Pierre Bourdieu, with the status consumption and others. We argue, I'll be brief, that historically the imperial mode of living starts with colonialism. There are sometimes arguments saying, no, also the Roman Empire was an imperial mode of living, or the Greek Empire, of course, yeah. But we want to understand capitalism. So we start with colonialism. Capitalism and colonialism go hand in hand. Capitalism is not possible without colonialism. And we should say it. And since colonialism, of course, this appropriation of commodities, gold, silver, later on agricultural products, later on fossil fuels, today the green fuels, lithium, copper, etc. This has to do with colonial relations. But the shaping of societies in the 16th, 70s until the 18th century, the shaping, the profound transformation of societies not took place in Europe. They took place in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, in the colonies. Yeah, you know the numbers, or you know these dynamics that took place, for example, in Latin America, that due to diseases, due to murder, due to slavery, many people died. Slaves were brought from Africa, etc., etc. So there, the economies were, the lives of people were really shaped. And we argue that in the 18th, 19th century, this started also to diffuse into the northern societies. Yeah, the so-called here in Vienna or in Austria, die Südfrüchte, yeah? The coffee house, the Kolonialwaren, the colonial commodities, etc., etc. So sugar, for example, there's this fantastic book by James Baldwin, those who are interested in global history, Sugar, A Global History, where he shows the historical development, not only at the production side, but also at the everyday level, at the consumption side, how important sugar was. And we could interpret, Baldwin and our approach go hand in hand. Yeah, he doesn't use the concept of imperial mode of living, but it's a fantastic explication of what we are talking about. And then we argue the imperial mode of living comes to itself in the global north during the post-war period, after the Second World War. What we call in critical social sciences Fordism, a reference to Henry Ford, to the assembly line, to the mass production, to the mass consumption. And this is very ambiguous. The generation of my parents, yeah, had for the first time in history as workers, my mother was a migrant from Poland, my father came from a very poor family. They experienced in the 50s, 60s, 70s, for the first time in history, an incredible wealth, a material wealth, a material well-being, and a stability of the everyday life, which was good. Yeah, some of you might know the work of Nico Pech, who has this criticism of consumption, and he's almost disgusted, yeah, that people consume. Yeah, this is not my point. Our point is we should consider that mass production and mass consumption, of course, contribute to something, but not overproduction and overconsumption, and this destructive relationship, which is today so important. So this is coming from critical theory, of course, thinking in contradictions, thinking in tensions, to understand this major tension that the imperial mode of living creates well-being, but also destroys so much. And also we have a chapter, Max announced it, that I work on Latin America. Of course, we have many examples from Latin America also, but also we looked at literature on China in the book. In the globalization process, since the 70s, 80s, 90s, the imperial mode of living, despite all environmental discourse, yeah, the Club of Rome report is 50 years old, limits to growth. But despite all these starting environmental consciousness, the imperial mode of living was deepening. Yeah, this has to do with cheap flying, with larger cars ever, but also with high tech, with cell phones, with notebooks, etc., etc. So we know from all the numbers, yeah, the ecological footprint or the great acceleration, how is it called, in some currents of sustainability research, is really the access to the resources after the Second World War is accelerating, and in the globalization process even more. And the imperial mode of living is very, very attractive in the global south. In those countries where a middle class evolves, yeah, in China, in India, in Brazil, in South Africa, not only the oligarchies, but also an important a portion of people, because they work hard, they have the aspirations to have a better life, but this reproduces, according to tendency, the imperial mode of living. So China, I look, because Keixin is here, yeah, China, there was a decision in the 80s that the well-being of an increasing mobility is automobility. Now the state reacts, now public transport is improved. But I was several times in Beijing, and in Beijing you saw that the lanes of the great circles, of the great circle trains, yeah, there were 30 years ago 3 lanes for the bikes, one lane, or 40 years ago, and 1 lane for the cars, and today it's the other way around. Yeah, so the decision that the improved or enhanced mobility of people is mainly automobility, and not to start with a good public transport network, etc., etc. Just for those who also want to work with the concept, I won't mention the other points. 2 colleagues from Jena, Anna Landher and Jakob Graf, have this very good idea, coined the very interesting concept of a peripheral mode of living. Their background, their example is China, and they argue that the imperial mode of living, it's Chile. I said China. Yeah, it's Chile. They said it's 2 major dynamics to understand the Chilean society when we look at it with the imperial mode of living. The first is the stabilization of class structures. Yeah, that the oligarchy, the international investors, the upper middle classes, they can justify an imperial mode of living because Chile needs to extract and export copper, yeah, and fish and flowers, but mainly copper. It's a mining nation. And so this is the image of a mining nation, is stabilizing a certain class structure. And the second aspect they argue, and they show empirically with their studies in Chile, that the subaltern, the lower classes, want it, they believe it, they think, yes, the destiny of Chile is copper, is resources, to extract them and to put them on the world market. And this is a very strong aspiration which decreases the thinking in alternatives. Yeah, now Gabriel Boric, the leftist president in Chile, and a wonderful process of social mobilization since October 2019. Many of you have followed it probably, or all of you. But the corridor of action for a now really leftist government, beside all the constellations in the parliament, in the Senate, but the corridor is also a very accepted imperial mode of living. And how to deal with this if you really want to take sustainability questions, social ecological transformations seriously. My last thought, which is how to counter this imperial mode of living and how to create a climate just society in the sense of Erde brennt, of so many other movements. This is not comprehensive, and we are defending, we were accused, the 8th chapter in the book is about the solidary mode of living, and of course we have afterwards made other contributions, but we were criticized. There is not a clear story, there is not a clear narrative of a solidary mode of living. And our answer is yes, because reality is so complex. Yeah? We cannot wait for the bullet, the magic bullet. We cannot we cannot look at the leverage, the turning point, which is the social movements or the state or the technology or the consumer. Yeah, this is too simple. So we have to look in which societal economic spheres changes are possible. This is a bit the background of our argument when we talk about alternatives, when we talk about a good living for all, which is nicely said, a good living for all. But think a good living for all at a global scale. This means for here a dramatic reduction of the throughput. This means for Austria, for Germany, a dramatic reduction of the production of cars and of the parts of the cars which is here the major or one of the major backbones of the Austrian economy. A good living for all is a principle. And the second is, I think you got it already, is a profound questioning of a capitalist mode of production and living. A capitalist mode of production and living, which means that the exchange value, that invested money needs to grow. This is the main idea detected by Marx and so many others, is to make more money out of money through a production process, which is exploitative when it comes to resources, when it comes to labor, etc., etc. And this logic doesn't work any longer. But to put societal, climate just, environmental questions first, yeah, and to think, how can we create well-being? And this brings us to a principle widely discussed in the last years, to the principle of care. Not to the principle of profit, but the principle of care should be at the center stage of the economy of our everyday life. The care for future, for nature, the care for ourselves, the care for society, and even the care for future. But to make it now a bit more concretely, and then I finish, our proposal is not to ask for Verzicht, not to ask for having less. If you remember, or those who follow the German newspapers, when the war against Ukraine started in February, Robert Habeck, the Minister of Climate and Economy, announced the need for Verzicht, the need for having less, for consuming less. And as I said, we need less throughput, but the semantics of Verzicht, the semantics of having less is usually, it's a class question. When the powerful talk about the Verzicht, having less, they mean usually the poorer people, the subaltern. Yeah? The experience in Germany is the Hartz reform, is a social, is a labor market reform that really affected the poor people. So our proposal is not to have from something existing less, but to make it radically different. It's not to have less cars, but to overcome cars. It's not to have less meat, but to overcome meat. It's not to have less clothes. No, we cannot overcome clothes, but to have another logic of clothing, yeah, of circular economies, of barter, of clothing, etc., etc. Yeah, I hope you get the point. The Verzicht is to have less from something. 80 from 100, what does it mean? The 100 is a big problem, and 80 is a problem as well. So, and the good message for us, and also from us, if you like, but there's so many other people who are saying it, it's that we have so many already existing experiences of this other world for a good living for all. We know from so many studies how city development should occur in a sustainable way. That it means that people have short distances and they don't have to move to Niederösterreich, Lower Austria, because they cannot afford the living in Vienna. We know, already said it, we need to overcome the centrality of the automobile. We need to overcome the centrality of flying when it comes to larger distances, which does not mean, of course, going from here to Latin America, you need to fly, but it does mean not to go from here to Berlin, to Frankfurt, and maybe even to Barcelona and Madrid by plane. Yeah, and how to change, it's not an individual choice, how to change a mobility system that you can go, if you like, or if you need, to Barcelona and Madrid with good means of transport and at a reasonable price. Yeah, and it's not 20 euro to fly to Madrid, but maybe it's 80 euro or 100 euro to go by train. This is to change our perspective. It's not the exchange value, money, GWG', money, commodity, money plus, but it's to think in use values. Yeah, to think in the production of a use value within the agricultural system, the mobility system, etc. And we defend, because a strong dispositif is that this should come mainly from the solidary economy, from a bottom-up economy. And we think, yes, it's very important to have the solidary economy and the bottom-up economy. Some here in the rooms are very active, I know, in this creation of this solidary economies. But we argue also that a strong public sector, a transparent and democratic public sector, is key. Yeah? A mobility system, a large-scale mobility system, is probably not made from the bottom up, but it needs a strong cooperation. Yeah? It needs qualification, it needs engineering, it needs investment. So what is sometimes forgotten in the debate on radical alternatives is the public sector, that it provides also something very important. Here, our educational system, yeah, it's public or privatized, yeah, and it's not. Maybe there are some. I'm not so familiar with the sphere of arts. Yeah, probably there are some private schools, or they are great, but we should also defend the public university, yeah, which is not only a bottom-up process. There is a state that should invest, that should give money. And then to end, and then we are here really in the room of Erde Brand. It needs spaces for deliberation. It needs spaces to speak about desires, about fear. There is a lot of fear in society, and this fear is also nurtured by Kronenzeitung, by others. Yeah, sometimes if the weekend I sometimes steal Kronenzeitung to go through when it's in the street, and you think sometimes if you read some sections of Kronenzeitung, you have a civil war in Austria. Yeah, you have pages, or Heute or Österreich, you know what I mean. Yeah, you think on 4 pages, here is civil war. People live, are threatened. Yeah, and so this, it's of course ideology, but it's also, there is a fear to lose a job, to, let's say, a more real and justified fear. It needs not one narrative, as I said, but it needs narratives. We can discuss it. Yeah, I'm still thinking there is not one grand narrative. There is another position, Klaus Dörre, he was recently also here in Vienna. He wrote this book on eco-socialism. I'm still not sure whether the term socialism or good living for all is kind of a comprehensive term, but we can discuss it afterwards. I think it's much more the concrete narratives, the narratives that are close to real experiences of people. And one narrative might be a Vienna liberated from the dominance of cars by 2030, or not whenever, by 2030. Yeah, I would defend. And we need, and this is also Erde Brand, we need concrete conflicts. We need to show, and I say this as a scientist, as a social scientist, not as an activist. We know that social change is possible when those who are more affected, those who are usually put aside, those who usually cannot articulate. Yeah, we know this from Latin America much better than from here. Yeah, the local communities that are really pushed aside, but also here that we need these organizing processes where the weaker, in the higher education institutions, but also in many, many other institutions, can formulate their desires. And my very last idea is that degrowth, we had 2.5 years ago, some of you probably have participated, had here a degrowth conference in Vienna, which was online, and you can look at the plenary sessions up. The idea of degrowth is, again, not to have less per se, not to have this Verzichts idea, but the degrowth means a project where well-being is created differently. Yeah, in some discussions you are asked, "Oh, you are a degrower. You mean people should have less?" No, today degrowth under capitalist conditions usually means crisis. And the crisis is solved at the backs of the weaker people, of the subaltern. The rich usually don't pay for the crisis. This is, if you like, degrowth by disaster. But the degrowth by design is a project to create real another society, in the sense and of course only some aspects I just described. So to think about, tomorrow there is a book presentation, some of you, or just look it up, in the Altangrund in this very nice alternative space created some month ago. They present the book on degrowth, which just came out, and you can download it also. A very, very important contribution. So, thank you very much for the attention. No.
Okay. We will stay on the stage because our remote control is too far away. So we wanted first to be horizontal. Now we will be. You can decide if you want to be on the stage or to be downstairs. And we invited two positions to comment Ulrich Brand. To comment Ulrich Brand lecture. And the two positions are, the first, I will present the two colleagues from KAUZ. We invited KAUZ. KAUZ is the name of a small old species. Today here are Ruth Fartaszek and Maxi Ziegler. KAUZ defines itself as the lab for climate justice, work and future, that explores, identifies and discusses why we live and work at the expenses of others and how we can achieve a good life for all. Workshops and other educational formats, such as social media, aim to provide spaces to unlearn the imperial mode of living and producing. They are based in Austria, Germany, Italy, and Croatia, and offer their work in 4 languages. And after KAUZ, we invited Hansel Sato also to comment the lecture. Hansel, KAUZ is there and Hansel is here. Hansel is a Peruvian artist living in Vienna. He's senior lecturer at the Institute of Art Education at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. He's also co-director of the Vienna Art Festival Soho in Ottakring and of the Soho Studios in St. Leitenhof. In the exhibition there in October this year, entitled On Plants, Stones and Waters, Counter-Narratives of Earthlings Between Multiple Crises, Hansel made the work Indulgence Trade. I think he will talk about it, which ironically addresses the imperial way of life. Okay, please, Ruth and Maxi, I invite you to come, and afterwards, Hansel.
Hello. This one. Okay, yeah. Yes. So we just try to find the right spot for us to sitting. I hope like many of you can kind of see us. And yeah, we are very happy to be here actually. We are Ruth and Maxi from the KAUZ project, and we agreed beforehand that I can say our welcomes to all of you. And yes, we're very happy to be here actually. We are not used usually to speak in front of so many people. So we really enjoy to have this opportunity and to share a bit our experiences from our work, which Ruth will explain later on a bit more. And yes, for doing so, we try to think of something that might be interesting for you also to listen. And we thought of, okay, well, let's try maybe some sort of an interview situation. I have some experiences because I do like also the podcast for the project, and usually I'm not interviewed but interview people, and now we try to do this with ourselves and give you a small overview of what we are doing. Yes. Ruud, what are we doing? Who's KAUZ?
Yeah, hello also from my side. Who is and what is KAUZ? So, KAUZ is a project. We feel very comfortable on this orange sofa because that's actually one of our visual identity colors. So maybe that's important for the artists among us. Is it coming? Yeah. So KAUZ means in German Werkstatt für Klimaarbeit und Zukunft. So that's where the name comes from. And in English it is Lab for Climate Justice Work in Future. We're a small team based in Croatia, Germany, Italy, and here in Vienna. And KAUZ mainly creates educational didactical material on just transition, the concept of just transition, and on the imperial mode of living and the counter concept of the solidary mode of living, which is the reason why we're here tonight. Yeah, and we, as I said, we create educational material. So all of our material is open source. We have different workshop concepts that can be applied by multipliers and trainers in various contexts. We have a podcast. We have some short video clips.
How short are they really?
Some of them not that short, up to 18 minutes. And we also do political education on social media. Yeah, so that's KAUZ very briefly. So we didn't start the project to kind of promote the imperial mode of living. So we don't want to promote the concept as such. But we think that there's some beauty in it for political education. And this is probably my first question to you, Maxi. So why do we use this concept of imperial mode of living in political education? And from your experience, what are the concept's strengths in this context?
So we're using several of the pillars of the concept actually. And I think the beauty of the concept is that it's very broad. So we brought you one of the diagrams we came up with. Like the visual implementation is actually all Team Bolzano work, but we try to kind of summarize a lot of things that, Ulrich Brand and Markus Wissen also wrote in their book in graphs and illustrations we can use in workshops, for example. This one specifically is also used in the workshop. We're like one of the concepts we are doing. And I think as you see already there are like a lot of different areas you can use. So you can talk about the foundations, for example. You can talk about the outsourcing and exploitation we're currently living in. And it's an invitation kind of to connect a lot of topics you want to address, we have to address in the crisis we are currently facing. And I think that's, provides us with a big flexibility actually. And it's not just a list of topics we can work on, but they're also interconnected. So I think this is a big advantage to also talk about ambivalences or about similarities, differences, things happening at the same time, the interconnectedness of things. And this is from our experience, I think a big advantage actually. And another point that kind of results from it is also the freedom that goes with it to adapt it in the local space and time we are located with our project, specifically now here in Vienna, to talk about the topics we think are the most relevant. And for the last year, we developed a focal point in care, for example, or the interconnectedness that evolves around the big topic of care work, care in climate crisis, how it's connected. And this is the freedom the concept gives us, I think.
May I add something?
Yes, please.
Yes, you already raised the point, and also it was also mentioned by Uli in his lecture. So what I think is really beautiful about the project, about the concept, is that it allows to speak about all these ambivalences and contradictions that result from the multiple crises. And I think, so, or from my point of view, this is really what political education must be all about, to open up these spaces where people can kind of critically discuss all these ambivalences and the systemic causes of the crisis, but at the same time kind of reflect upon their own position in all of this and in all their entanglements. So, and this is what KAUZ tries to contribute to this fight, that we kind of open these spaces, transformative, emancipatory spaces, where people, including ourselves as trainers, can kind of unlearn the imperial mode of living.
Yes, and after having spoken about the advantages, Ruth, what are maybe also the limits of the concept in working with it and in specifically the field of political education?
So you already pointed it out very well. The concept is super broad and super complex. And of course, this is a strength of it. That's the reason why we're working with it. But at the same time, it can be quite challenging for political education. So the concept is academic. It is quite demanding for many people. And if you work with the concept of the imperial mode of living in political education, it is a lot of effort to translate it to people and to kind of bring it down to earth. And related to that, I would also say, like, it's actually quite interesting because it's really not the point of the concept, but if people are confronted with the concept for the first time, what happens very often is that people mainly receive the message, ooh, I need to change my consumption behavior. And of course, there's some truth in it, especially for people in global north. But still, that's not the point of the concept. And so what we try to, of how to avoid it is that we really highlight this difference between lifestyle and mode of living, or in German, Lebensweise and Lebensstil. And by lifestyle, we mean this rather in a narrow sense, consumption decisions, while with mode of living, we mean something much broader. So you can see it in the bottom of this diagram. So it is about all the infrastructures and the institutions, about social norms, our daily routines that all kind of shape certain pathways in which we're forced to live our lives. Yeah. Do you want to add something?
Yes, I think another experience of ours also in working with this concept, so we are having interactions with groups, but also with single and people, with individuals. It depends like who also contributes. It's not just us doing the KAUZ work actually, but we're like a broader collective. And I think sometimes it's also a difficult topic, but also I think very important to raise it actually, because we are working with a concept that addresses systemic levels of inequalities. And I think one thing we can also observe is that sometimes, especially privileged people, feel comfortable working with this concept, which is kind of contradictory. And especially, like, to put it very simple, is like sometimes, okay, why do, for example, white men feel very comfortable working with this concept, which is, or like, how does it go together when it's like really about systematic critiques and discourses and discussions about inequalities? And I think this is something we're sometimes stepping upon it. And this is like a question we bring for all of you, maybe also, how to, discuss it also, because it's actually a really valid question, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Super interesting question. Maybe also, Uli, you have some ideas, and of course, the audience. And I think we're running out of time almost. So I've prepared a last question to you, and actually I borrowed from you, from your podcast. So usually, as final question, you ask your guests a certain question, and I will now direct it to you. So the question is, I need to cheat maybe. Where do we meet if the changes we advocate for have become reality?
Oh yes, I know that I asked this question. And it's not an easy question, actually. I never had to answer it so far. And I got also the most stunning answers to that, actually. So it's very nice. It's very different answers. I think for me, we will meet in a world where we try and where it's possible to talk about different, positionalities, about like having awareness that we're starting from different positions in, all-day life, basically. I think it's also a world where there will be more justice, or there has to be already have occurred more justice to be able to reach this changed world, basically. Because right now we're living on the cost of others, you know, and there's no room free of hierarchies. And I think that's, yeah, very hard to imagine for me also, but I think this would be like some thoughts I have on mind on this question right now. But actually, that's not the last question in my podcast. At the very, very end, I also ask if there's something, a topic or a story we didn't address yet and you still want to raise.
Indeed, we forgot something. So, some self-promotion. Okay. Here it is. So we just wanted to invite you to check out our materials. As I said, it's open source, and the project lives from people adapting these materials to their context. And yeah, listen to this podcast. It's really amazing. I can say that because I'm not involved in it at all. So let's go. Yeah.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe just a teaser. We just published 2 hours ago an interview with Ulrich Brand at Campus Wien. So if you're interested, then you're happy, like heartily invited to listen to it.
And I thought also maybe that could be a question, a short-term answer to the question of where we will meet if the change will happen. We're advocating for so at the at the Ulrich Brand Besetzung.
Yes.
Sir.
Hello. Yeah. I just wanted to add really quickly that you forgot to highlight your brochure, which actually the KAUZ project is based on, and it's on the book table as well. So everyone have a look afterwards. And I hand over to Hansel.
I think it's not moving the image, maybe. Ja, mit dem rechts. Okay, super, super. Thank you, thank you. Okay, hi. First of all, congratulations for this great occupation. I'm Hansel Sato, and I'm going to present some work related to the concept of imperial mode of living. Well, thank you, Max and Carlo, for your kind invitation to participate in this conference. The work I want to talk about has been shown for the first time in a collective art exhibition called Learning from Plants, Stones and Waters. This is the poster. The show took place in October of this year at Soho in Ottakring, at Soho Studios, with the participation of Eliana Ota, Imana Cáceres, Alfredo Ledesma, and myself. Soho Studios is an open space for art, culture, and social exchange located in Viennese municipal housing St. Leitenhof, the Gemeindebau St. Leitenhof. The exhibition was the result of a collective experiment and ongoing collaboration between 4 artists. We are 4 artists from Peru, but which are living in Vienna several years. The exhibition learning from plants, stones, or rocks and waters explore the fluid and changing relationship between nature and human in the age of the Anthropocene and neoliberal capitalism. Through the means of art, we have tried to imagine a new expanded we beyond human-centered word use. We wanted to tell stories of solidarity, ecological awareness, and planetary healing in the face of the current socio-ecological crisis we are confronted with, in the face of sick planet. The stories of hope, but also of mourning and care for the future, to paraphrase author Elke Krasny. As a starting point, we took our honest perspectives and experiences as people from the global south who have been working and living in Europe for, as I say, several years. And main idea that inspired the artistic project was the concept of buen vivir. The Spanish term buen vivir means good life. So let's show more pictures. Buen vivir is a philosophy of life that originally comes from indigenous peoples of South America. The Quechua people know it as summa KAUZ. The Aymara people speak of summa camaña. Buen vivir means thinking and thinking well, so feeling well, and doing well in order to do the right thing. The ultimate goal is to achieve harmony with your community, with your family, with your environment, and with the universe. The principle of buen vivir refused to strive only for economic growth, but is much more about a dynamic balance between humans and nature. In order for balance to prevail, all Earth's beings should be provided in such a way that their basic needs are satisfied and they can live a dignified life. This is the main point. Dignity. From the point of view, from this point of view, nature is also a subject with his own rights, and they must be respected. This is a biocentric notion that challenges the modernist vision of nature as resources subject to human use. During the exhibition, there were several workshops dealing with these concepts in cooperation with the students of the Art Academy of Vienna, the Art and Education Program of the Academy of Vienna. And the exhibition space became a kind of laboratory for reflection and discussion. For us, it was very important to integrate the people of the neighborhood in Saarleitenhof from this Gemeindebau. And really the main question, the basic question was, or central question was, whether is it possible to live a good life in Western societies despite being immersed in the imperial mode of living? No? This is a main question. Is it possible in this context to have a good life, to do the right things, like this Quechua principle? And at this point, I would like to talk actually about my work. This is the contextualization where I presented a small graphic series called Indulgence Trade. Unlike my colleagues, our projects, the focus that focus on imagining solutions to the planetary disease, my work focuses on the causes of this disease. I have worked on the visual representation of what people wish, desire, and fear, and where their wishes, desires, and fears came from in a global world colonized by neoliberal ideology. Let's take a look at these desires, wishes, addictions, and fears. Don't give up on anything To give up means limiting your freedom. Thou shalt be afraid to have less than your ancestors, less than your neighbors, less than people you want to belong to. Buy more fat, burn more fat. I have produced digital portraits of persons performing this ideology, people who are submerged in this imperial mode of living, individuals who have internalized the imperative of endless growth, the idea of profit maximization, and what the sociologist Eva Illus called the happiness imperative. It means if you are not able to achieve happiness, to be happy, it is your own fault. No? So you're a loser. So, thou shalt enjoy every single second of your life. Thou shalt find, buy, measure, increase your happiness. My goal was to portray the addictions of a hyper-consumerist global middle and upper class addicted to the principle of improvement. Thou shalt do yoga or meditate to immediately become more efficient, focused, productive, and attractive. The title Indulgence Trait, in German Ablasshandel, is an ironic commentary on certain fair trade practices or bogus solutions which are nothing but greenwashing. The practices are very often palliatives that only perpetuate an immoral economic global system and render invisible racial, gender, and economic inequality. Conscious or unconsciously, we are just trying to buy redemption to our own participation on the environmental degradation. So, thou shalt buy organic and fair trade products. As much as possible, if you buy more, you recycle more. Drive fast, but only electric cars. Thou shalt fly a lot. The carbon emissions of your flight can be offset by a small contribution to climate protection projects. This is not invented. These sentences I have taken from the websites from some companies. For example, this is I seen from Austrian Airlines. And so you can fly like green, let's say. No? The shiny gold frames you can see alludes ironically to the fact that Western modernity considers the human, specifically the white man, as the crown of creation. I combine these portraits staged in the manner of Baroque paintings and images of saints with phrases written in religious code. The sentences are, at least in my opinion, the new commandments of neoliberal religion. As you can see, I play with the idea of capitalism as a religion, a long-standing idea. Contemporary authors like the historian Eugene McCarthy argues one may consider capitalism as a religion in the sense that it is a system of beliefs and rituals in which economic plays a theological role. He said that capitalism is a new perverse form from enchantment. Misdirection, exactly. Enchantment, a misdirection of our desires for a sacramental way of being in the world. This perverse sacramentality is on display throughout capital civilization, in management theory, in industrial design, in advertising, in economics. On the other hand, the historian Yuval Noah Harari calls capitalism the new religion, arguing that the main dogma of capitalism is that economic growth is the highest good. Thou shalt grow and prosper and become infinitely large on a planet of finite size. Similarly, the philosopher Byung-Chul Han tries a negation of death in the belief in endless growth, concluding that, I quote, "Capitalismos inherit metaphysics. It constitutes a materialist metaphysics that seeks for infinite capital," end of quote. And in fact, Silicon Valley's entrepreneurs are investing a lot of money into the quest of immortality, for example. And Mark Zuckerberg has called Facebook the new charge. And let's finish in talking about some issues related to the technology. In Dunge's Strait, this area, conjures up a ghost in the machine. For my prints, I use an image generator that uses artificial intelligence to produce absolutely real-looking portraits of people. Also, these people are not real. None of one. The machine, this artificial machine, produces all the portraits. However, the software keeps producing glitches, small technical failures, and generate images with distorted human features like demons or zombies, which appear next to the smiling, nice faces. The shadows hidden in the interstices of a perfect Instagram world, a brave new world. Maybe you have already seen, if you see the images, maybe not, I don't know. If you see, there is always an image beside the main face, and this is a failure of the program. You see this face with two eyes beside the main face, or here. No? So the machine is always producing this failed image, yeah? This failed image, and sorry, it's just to finish the idea. In this sense, the work is a kind of self-contradictory work, a paradox. Another project made in large part by artificial intelligence pretends to question the Western paradigm of productivity, but algorithms themselves are the most perfect expression of this paradigm. But we could develop these thoughts later. Well, and at this point I will finish the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Also to you, Hansel. We would suggest that we take around 10 minutes, that maybe you, after hearing these three contributions, talk to the person next to you about what is open, what is clear, what kind of questions you may have. And then we regroup, maybe we make it a little more comfortable in the front, and then we open the discussion, happily also in connection to the demands and whatever the occupation movement wants to bring in. Anything you want to add right now, or is it okay after the 10? Okay, perfect. Okay, so I don't know what the time is, but 10 minutes from now.
So we would now be ready to hear your questions or comments or thoughts or feelings. And however you feel comfortable, you can speak with the microphone or without, and maybe raise your hand. And also thank you very much to all the presenters, and they are ready now to also answer your questions maybe, or re-comment on your comments, whatever. So are there any people who want to speak?
Hi, great presentations, really cool. I have a question for Ulrich about degrowth, and I was just wondering if redistribution would have, because I think you never said that word, but I always connect degrowth with redistribution as well, because it's not about Verzicht, but it's about, there's a lot of stuff in the world already, but it's some people have a lot of it and some people don't have a lot of it. And I was just thinking if that would be a concept.
Yeah, maybe we could collect one more or two more questions and then answer them together. So are there any further questions? Yeah.
Maybe a question to KAUZ, because you talked about using imperial modes of living as your kind of system to think about how systems are connected, and I was wondering why you're using this concept instead of system sciences, for example, which also talk about these interconnections and complexities.
Maybe one more if there is right now. Yes.
I can go.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I have a question to KAUZ and Ulrich Brand. I would be interested where the sources of your ideas come from, because I don't think that it's so much the academia originally, and I would be interested in that.
Yes. So maybe whoever likes to start answer, maybe you, Ulrich Brand.
Thank you very much for those questions. I also would like to highlight something we just heard from the comments. KAUZ, and this is also very important for the debate on radical alternatives, speaks about work. And this is usually not part of the sustainability debate. I would like to underline it. It was not so present in your concept. Usually the idea of sustainability is here as a state to make the regulations. Here are the companies producing, and here are the consumers and public consciousness. But usually the sphere of work, the sphere of labor, the major everyday experience of so many people is absent. And this is, and the first brochure, you have a look, it was also a writing workshop, a very, very intense process to think. And there were in Germany also two other writing projects, but here in Austria, and also with the support by the Chamber of Labor, this centrality of work was focused. And I think this is really, this is really important, I would like to highlight. A second aspect, I don't want to be too long, but what also you said, and also in Hansel's work, the concept of imperial mode of living tries to avoid to moralize, to say you should not do this or that, but really to bring together, and this makes the complexity, I think it's a very important point, it's a structural category. It tries to understand what are the societal structures we live in. And of course, we act under this framework. The mobility system is a system, and then we commute, or we bike or walk or whatever, or the food system is a system, and then we live, we make our living, or we work. But it's not to say you should do it differently. It's not this idea of a green consumerism. And it's rejecting a very strong topic within the sustainability debate, within the powerful greening of capitalism debate, which is the individualization of responsibility. You are responsible, and the younger generation even feels it. I should go green. But the structures are elsewhere. And I think this is a strength, and KAUZ works on this. And with Hansel, thank you very much. Also, I saw this exhibition. This is really a wonderful work. When you say the idea of the good living is a dignified life, but the dignified life not in a romanticizing way. Oh, how nice live the Aymara or Quechua, but to translate it into our context with the principle. And I think this is also the point where we get together is not at the cost of others and not at the cost of nature. This is the major principle of the imperial mode of living. And then how we do this depends on the very concrete context, on the very concrete experiences. And this is the strength of the Buen Vivir, not in the romanticizing way, these nice indigenous peoples, they are closer to nature, yeah, etc., etc. And then coming to your points. Yes, I think that degrowth is about redistribution, but not only about a material redistribution, it's also a redistribution of power, of societal power. Yeah? So if you look at Piketty, which I think it's wonderful work on of global inequality, but this is the political, I don't want to criticize it too much. I think it's wonderful. It's a great work. But the idea of Piketty is social engineering. So we have the numbers, we have the inequality, we have the 1%, we have the 10%, and now we have the mass to redistribute. And I would say yes, Thomas, but it's not only a question of material wealth, it's a question of power, and it's a question, as I said, of another form of well-being. So it's not this Keynesian understanding, we have the industrial society and people should have less, the rich, and the poor should have more, but we have to really transform a society. And the last question, the most difficult one, is the sources of the ideas. This would be a very interesting question. Just very briefly. Yes, Markus Wissen and I, we are academics, critical academics, but we were always activists. Yeah, I was politicized in the environmental movement in Western Germany. I was very much politicized. Some people, we worked together also here, to the Zapatistas in Chiapas. Yeah, this was very important to me in the 90s, and also to understand how they resisted. And many others in the Alto globalization movement. I was active after 2000. So I would say it's coming together of critical thinking, but not only from the desk, but also kind of from an activism. And activism to me also always meant to organize, and not to organize only nice academic workshops, but also to organize political conferences or to participate in political conferences. And I finished there. And there comes, like here, yeah, there comes a thinking together, a critical perspective on the world, which usually we don't have in a mere academic setting. Very, very superficial answer to a very complex question, but maybe you got an idea.
Okay. So the question you raised was why we work with the concept of the imperial mode of living and why we chose this concept. And I think there are two different strands of answer to that. So one is the pragmatic and one is the theoretical answer. The pragmatic is, as you already mentioned, and Max showed this booklet. So the KAUZ project developed out of this collaborative writing workshop, which was on the imperial mode of living and work and this connection of these two topics. So we were 12 people, many of them among us. That's really nice. And we wrote this booklet, and after that we decided, okay, we want to continue with doing political education and create more material on that. So it's kind of in our roots and in our story of how we came into being and origins. And the theoretical answer is, I mean, we already talked about some things, why we think that the imperial mode of living is very fruitful and valuable in the context of political education. But like for me personally, I would say it's that this concept includes power relations, and that has really a huge explanatory value. So if I want to look at the systemic causes, then I need to talk about power relations. And then also, I mean, now we talked a lot, it might have looked like we would only talk about the imperial mode of living. Indeed, we use many different contexts, concepts in our work. We kind of are very pragmatic when it comes to which concept we use, because we think, okay, what do we want to bring through? And then we think what we could use. Maybe you want to answer the question to the ideas?
Yes, where do we get our ideas? I think I can only answer this question on a very personal level. For me personally, I get ideas, and I actually joked about this already with you and also I think some other people, the best ideas for the podcast, which I'm responsible for, so this is like my sphere where I can answer this, is actually my kitchen table. So I don't know how it happens, but the most interesting people I met at our kitchen table, which is in the frame of like, I'm living with 5 people and then there's staying over people also a lot of times. And I'm very grateful to that actually. And this is how also some of the most interesting talks develop, which I'm very grateful that I could talk to, for example, my next episode, Barbara and Angelica, a geologist and a lawyer in the meantime from Brazil, who are now based in different locations, and talked about geoethics, for example. And there was a conference in Vienna, that's why one of them stayed with us. And this is how I get, I think, ideas that I can connect to the concept and also in the bigger frame. But it's a very daily life experience, I would say, from this, because I'm not working in academia, so this is kind of my experiences I get, and I then can maybe connect to these topics and put into work. And this is also like, I think how our work is structured. We're very small team. Basically, it's not more than 5 people that are like very active, always on the main time. There are a lot of people like contributing actually. But I think in total, it's never more than 5 at the same time, right? And we are used to work with a lot of personal experiences and trust, and also what our exposure is at the time, I would say.
Would you also like to add something? Or? Okay.
Actually, I just wanted to tell Ulrich, yes, you talk about this romanticization of the buen vivir, and it's really a problem, but it's not just a problem in Europe, but in Peru too. And in South America, we have these more Western societies. In Peru, for example, there are people like me that were born in the coast. The coast was more Spaniard and more with influence from US America. And there is this culture in the Andes, you know. And we have exactly the same problem, this romanticization of this old ancient culture. And we even learned it in the books, in the school. And something that resonated with me really was when you mentioned that these countries consider themselves as mining countries, because I wrote in this belief, no? Peru is a country that is exporting gold, and we are always, the big rivals were the Chileans, you know, who export more. And this is really became part of our identity as Peruvians always. No? We are the people who are exporting all these minerals to the world, and we should be very proud of it. And on the other hand, in the Andes, there are many indigenous people that are working in this mining industry. And there is a kind of contradictions because they need the jobs. But they need the jobs that are destroying their environment. So it's really, really a difficult situation for many poor people that in Peru are especially indigenous people, no? living in the Andes. I wanted just to...
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all your questions and comments and your answers. Are there any more questions?
Maybe one more. I was just wondering from all of you, what would you consider the perfect balance of top-down and bottom-up initiatives or for a sustainable world or transformation?
Hello, my name is John Paul. Thank you again for the great presentations. My question, or rather, I'd like to hear from you example where the wrath of imperial living, you felt it and could recognize it. or either like the wrath of imperial living, or the effects of imperial living, either negative or positive, where you felt it and recognized it?
I think we have the time and space for one more question, if there is, and other than that.
Otherwise, I have a question/comment. On Uli, you mentioned really briefly just this question of, or this aspect of habitus in the imperial mode of living. And I was wondering also to connect it with what is happening here, right now. Like, what do you think is the value of this habitus approach also for the solidary mode of living, or how does, in other words, do we need something like Brand? That's maybe too easy question, to change this habitus, or what's the value in it? Yeah. To all of you, actually. But.
Yeah, thanks. I don't remember who the first question was addressed to, but all of them. So
I start and you complement or contradict. Hansel's example is very, very important. And we could say that indigenous people make their living out of mining and then defend mining is that capitalism imposes false. I said capitalism. Imposes the false alternative. It's you can survive when you exploit nature and when you sell your labor power, or you die. And the alternative, the solidary mode of living, is to get rid of mining, or to have a radically different form of mining, and to have other forms of living. Yeah, to have agriculture, to have tourism, whatever, sustainable tourism, whatever. But this is really important to understand, that the attractiveness is not that people want to live in the mining industry, yeah, but there is a desire, there is a discourse. Yeah, you learn in school, Peru is the mining country, full stop. Yeah, and this is important to recognize. And if you like, have a look. It's in German, a book with Alberto Acosta. He was the president of the constituency in Ecuador, where for the first time in history, the rights of nature is constitutionalized, 2008. And we published a book where we compare a bit the degrowth debate in Europe and the Buen Vivir debate in Latin America, putting into the context. It's Radikale Alternativen is the title. The question of top-down and bottom-up, it's a very good question because it's too abstract. I think the question is valuable because we have to think always both. It's not the romanticizing of social movements, and it's not the romanticizing of the strong state or the maybe not so strong state, but to look what is the concrete conjuncture when it comes to the radical transformation of mobility. We have here a minister of climate and 7 other things, and she can put money into a climate ticket. So this is a top-down which comes from the bottom up. She decided at the end not to build Lobau Tunnel, but this was very important to have the bottom up, and then there is a top-down decision. And I think we have to look, but to have it in mind. And I said in other discussions, maybe it's not only the top-down and the bottom up, it's also the from aside. Yeah, we think many times in the state and the social movement, but we have here Austria is a country of associations. It's a Verbände-Demokratie. It's an association. We have the Chamber of Labor, the Chamber of Commerce, etc., etc. We have Greenpeace. So to take seriously that these Verbände, these associations also need to change, yeah, from within. Or even if we look at schools, it's not enough. I don't want to speak too long, but it just triggers my mind. To have a radically different educational system is not only that the state, the ministry says, now we go for a social ecological transformation, which would never happen. The school teachers or the university employees need to start in their institution. This is Brand, in their institutions, to change the institutions. And this is not only from below, not from above, it's from aside or from inside or whatever. Yeah, and maybe the effects of the imperial mode of living. This is good. I feel the effects every day, but my proposal is to take it as a form of thinking, a form to look at the world, without being always moralized, but to accept that we live in contradictions. My ecological footprint in Austria is, if I don't move, if I don't do anything, already too high. Because the ecological footprint is a societal one. It's the infrastructures, it's how the university is organized, it's how so many things are organized. It's not only my footprint, it's an average. So it helps me to look in my everyday life at contradictions. Yeah, when I fly to Latin America, I know that this is bullshit from an ecological point of view, but kind of politically, scientifically, it makes sense. But not to fly 4 times a year, but maybe 1 time a year or every other year, whatever. So this helps me to put myself into a context which is highly contradictory, not easy, yeah, not comfortable, but without reducing everything to I feel bad, bad, bad. This is a bit my point. And to finish, Max questions. Here. Yeah, I would go with KAUZ. The other habitus is to unlearn the habitus of the imperial mode of living, and to learn and to feel. It's not only cognitive. Yeah, here this is your world here. Yeah, it's also to feel affected that to do something different, to think differently, makes something with me. But the idea of Bourdieu was the habitus is that a social structure goes into your body. It's not your choice. Yeah. So this comes back. And how can we learn an auto-free society or a meat-free society? This has to do then with the subject, but it has to do with something which comes from society. And this would be unlearn and learn in this sense.
I like this question of how people, or of examples of when people feel affected by the imperial mode of living. I also use it sometimes in my workshops because I think it's really a question we need to raise, because then people can connect to this quite abstract concept. Yeah, and from my experience, so I mean, first of all, it depends massively on whom you ask. So also the question of how much people benefit and how much like suffer under the imperial mode of living. But also like, yeah, to a typical audience of mine, the question of where people suffer, what comes surprisingly often is time pressure. So that people really feel this permanent pressure of doing more and more and more. I think that also came out very nicely in your exhibition and your examples of the imperial mode of living, this pressure of optimizing all the time. Yeah, and also questions like, okay, I want to change my behavior, and yes, of course, I would prefer to go by night train to Barcelona, but it's just not affordable and there's no night train, so I need to fly. And that's like when people really experience these systemic, or that there is, yeah, there are systemic causes of all of this. Yeah, these are 2 examples that came to my mind. And then the question of bottom up and top down, I really cannot answer it. I also want to kind of highlight what you said, that it's, or for me, it's sometimes super hard to distinguish between bottom up and top down, also because there's already something like an institutionalized bottom up processes, or like, yeah. And then I'm not sure anymore if that's really bottom up or what we're talking about. But we definitely need more social movements.
And maybe one more thought on the impacts of the imperial mode of living. I think this is a very difficult part also to try to grasp them on the structural level, you know, because the individual things and examples we can work with are usually the ones also linked to consumption. But I think actually the effects of the imperial mode of living are like also like we feel them structurally, but you cannot. It's very hard to pin them down. you know. And I think like what we already said, like one topic we worked now intensively the last year was care work. And for example, we did a video on global care chains, which are in the region of like an apparent solution. So like people come, for example, to Austria to work in the care sector to fill up gaps that exist, and apparently also solve, for example, gender questions and role questions like who's caring for whom, when, how much time. And so it creates a sort of an apparent solution maybe here, but like the conflict, the problematics, the societal questions are not solved. Like they're there, we just like outsource them kind of, and it is part of all our lives. And I think we find them all in our, I don't know, personal surroundings, friend circles, families, and yeah, we're part of it too, kind of. And I think that's hard to pin down sometimes. But I think it's a very good question, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, just some words related to the bottom-up work. In Soho, in Ottakring, in San Latin, we make different workshops and work with the neighbors. And many people who are going to the our events and workshops are people, unemployed people, or people that people from the working class, or for the people without money. So, and the difficulty is always how to explain them that they should live, let's say, green. Also, for example, how do they buy bio products when they are very expensive in the supermarkets? And this is always the question. So I earn 1,000 euro and I should like buy bio products. So this is one aspect. And the second aspect is that there are, I have talked with some, for example, people that they are still having this dream of the American dream, you know, so like having a SUV car, you know, and they're still thinking in the parameters of this hegemonic ideology, you know, and it happens in my country too, in the middle class. You mentioned it already, you know? So we have this paradigm, is still this Western paradigm, and the globalization did it not actually, this is the bad aspect of the globalization, did it not better, because we have now the images everywhere in internet, you know, the models and the films and all this Western way of life, and well, we see the results. No? Chinese people, they want more cars and they want eat more meat. So, and it's really very difficult. Where do you do this bottom-up work with which people? It's and the second thing related to the consequences of the imperial mode of living. I think we live in a permanently in a contradiction. You know. When I was a child, I used to eat quinoa. Yeah, quinoa, you know quinoa? Quinoa? Okay, this is a Peruvian product. And my mother comes from the Andes, and she used to prepare quinoa, but you can stigmatize people if you see what they eat, no? Because quinoa during this time was like the food for Indian people, you know, and it was very cheap. Now quinoa is very fancy, you know, and Peru is exporting a lot of quinoa, and of course it's getting very expensive for the people living in Peru, for example, indigenous people. And so I love quinoa, so I see this product in the supermarkets. And it's a very good product, you know, it's very nutritive, and I would like to buy it for my children. And then comes this contradiction. Yeah? So, you know, should I buy it or not? This moral aspect is what is for me very interesting. This is related to my work too. No, this you should know. But I was talking with my child, And of course, trying to explain him all these things. He's 10 years old. But at some point, I had the feeling I did something wrong because he said, "Papa, I am bad. No, I am bad." And I said, I did something wrong, you know? How do you do that? No, education is so important, the way you explain children that they are not bad. Yeah? That they are living in this system. I feel myself like shit, sorry. But it was, there is, you know, I'm still working on how to educate, inform people, children too, and avoid that they feel this guilty, because guilt don't help. Yeah? Well, it's just wanted to.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for your answers and opening up the complexities and more questions, and for your questions as well. So for now, we would like to maybe do a short break so all of you can make yourself more comfortable in the space, get some food. Also, one person was very generously cooking for us, so this will arrive soonish. So if you have any bowls or plates or cutlery, please try to bring it here, because we don't have access to a central cutlery storage or whatever. So yeah, and then we would like to meet again in 10-20 minutes to start with a plenum to speak about our demands. So it would be amazing if all of you would stay and maybe bring even more people here. And if you already want to engage with the drafts of the demands, you can find them there in the corner in English and German version, and a QR code also for the document. And also, we would like to invite you as well to maybe go to the reading corner, where you can also find some of the publications that have been mentioned. And yes, this is our space, so just do whatever you want to do. Maybe also change the chair arrangement to a bit more informal way. So yeah, if you have any further comments or questions now. Okay. If not, so yeah, thank you.